After 4 years of building a cabin in the woods that you didn't plan on living in, what would you do if you suddenly found yourself having to survive the winter in that cabin by yourself off-grid? You might think you just move in and have a good time. But I'm here to tell you, there are challenges, especially living alone in the mountains on a bit of a north slope near the Canadian border at 3,200 feet in elevation. First of all, let me tell you, if you're not planning to do that and you suddenly find yourself doing it, you're going to be faced with some challenges that you may not have thought of, or perhaps you really didn't think were going to be an issue. First of all, in the winter, up near the Canadian border at 3,200 feet in elevation on the north slope of a hill, the sun is going to go down early and come up late. That might not seem like that big of a deal, but it presents a couple challenges. One, you're not getting solar power like you do in the summertime. So if you planned your solar power setup with an average of 4 hours of sunlight and you get 2 hours in the middle of winter, well, guess what? You might have problems. And one of the first things that I found was that I had to run my generator 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening every single day, pretty much. That's just the way it was. In fact, if I wanted to turn my television on or my internet on or anything like that, I found it was better just to fire up the generator and let it run for an hour or two. Anyway, that way not only was I charging my batteries up, but I wasn't draining them while watching TV or something like that, which are energy hogs. The other thing you have to realize is that if your batteries get cold, well, they lose capacity. Lead acid battery at freezing can be 25% less capacity than it has at 70 degrees. So that's a challenge for spending a winter off-grid. Now, that's not even an issue by yourself. That could be with 12 people in your house. It doesn't matter. If batteries get cold, well, that's an issue. So the first thing you're going to want to do is either not use as much power, which means you don't have lights on all the time, you're not watching TV, and you're running your generator more, or keep your batteries warm. And that could be a challenge if you're not there keeping your cabin warm all the time. So that's number one. Two, you have to come up with a routine, and that routine becomes fairly rigid. And my routine was fairly simple. It really revolved around another issue that I faced. And that issue was, even with well-insulated walls, roof, and floor, my cabin would lose 10 to 12, even 15 degrees throughout the day, depending on how long I was gone. Because there's no source of heat unless I'm there stoking the wood stove. So it cools down. Now, I had a backup heater to prevent it from getting below 50 degrees. But if you showed up every day at 4 o'clock or 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening after work, and the first thing you had to do was warm your cabin up from 50 degrees to, say, a comfortable 70 degrees, well, that takes time. It takes a long time to warm up all of that mass very quickly. So you want to try to keep it as warm as possible. So what does that have to do with routine? Well, the routine was simple. When I got up in the morning, the cabin was usually down into the 60s. Well, that's great. You sleep really well. But the first thing I would do was get that wood stove stoked up as well as I could. I wanted it roaring. And of course, you know, the usual routine of having coffee and all that kind of stuff, and then you're going to take off. Well, when you take off, you need to make sure that everything that doesn't require power is turned off. So that's part of your routine. You just go around your cabin, all the lights are out, everything, stereo, whatever, modem, everything is turned off. There's nothing on except the refrigerator. You lock up, jump in your truck, and away you go, you head off to work. And if it's the middle of winter, you've got chains on, which, of course, that's not necessarily an off-grid thing, but it was for me. So the first thing I had to do is when I got 3 miles down the road to the nearest paved road, I had to take my chains off. At the end of the day, it took an hour to get up to the cabin. So by the time I got to the bottom of my road, I had to put my chains on to make it up to 3 miles to get to the cabin. And the very first thing I would do, as soon as I walked in the door of the cabin and flipped on the lights, was stoke the wood stove. And then go out and carry in a load of firewood, enough firewood to make it all the way through the night and into the next morning without issue. It's now pitch black out. You just got home from work, and there's no just getting home from work and pouring a drink and sitting down and relaxing for 20 or 30 minutes or an hour or something like that, right? That's not how off-grid life works. The first thing you're going to do is get that wood stove going and restock all the wood you can. But wait, there's more. If you're unfortunate and it gets cold, and I mean cold, as in 20 below cold. In fact, anything below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I found that my P-traps would freeze. And unfortunately for me, I hadn't finished the underneath of the cabin. I still haven't to this day. I've got work to do. But at that time, with it exposed, below 10 degrees, the P-trap for my bathtub would freeze solid and break because I hadn't started using RV antifreeze to protect it at that point. I learned that lesson hard. And if you leave for any period of time, which I did because my wife lived 4.5 hours away, and if I could take a weekend and go home, or say for Christmas and go home for a week, I would leave my power on, which is a challenge, folks, because if you're not there and you can't monitor your power, you better hope that you have it set up right. Now, of course, I had an automatic generator start switch and a generator that I checked. Everything was good to go before I left, and all I had on was my backup heat set to about 50 degrees in the cabin, and my refrigerator and the rest of the solar power running with some fans to keep heat in my back room circulating. Because I discovered the hard way that if I didn't put a couple 120 millimeter fans in the ceiling facing down to the ground, then the heat just went to the top of the ceiling and sat there and it'd be freezing at ground level, and guess what? Then my toilet wouldn't work. Yes, I experienced that. When you're gone for a week or two and then you come home and it's 22 below zero, guess what? Your P-traps are frozen. Your gray water drain has frozen. The water lines in the walls have frozen, and that's with a cabin that was maintaining 50 degrees inside. Everything was frozen. I was able to get my water lines thawed out once I got the cabin warmed up, which took a little work, but I got it warmed up. Obviously couldn't use any of my gray water drain because my gray water drain was frozen solid. And I guess I didn't know that that was going on because we didn't have a big snowfall. And I hadn't gone out and checked anything. I hadn't double insulated the gray water tank or anything of that nature. And without that snowfall to provide insulation over that gray water tank and pipes, it froze solid. And then I probably had a shower or something, and guess what? All that water went into the big 4-inch pipe, sewage pipe that goes out to my gray water drain, and froze solid. So that I literally had frozen pipes all the way to the cabin. I actually had to remove the P-trap under my kitchen sink and put a 5-gallon bucket under the sink in order to catch water so I could use the sink. And I put 2 wash basins in the sink so that ideally I wouldn't even have water go into that 5-gallon bucket. It was easier just to use those and then dump them out outside down the bank. And that's all I could do. And guess what? No running water means you got a frost free outside, you need to use it. But you've got to be careful with frost freeze. If you use a frost free like a regular tap, then they can also freeze because you're trying to saturate too much water underneath the frost free. The way a frost free works is when you open it up, it opens a valve and the water comes out the spigot just like normal. But when you close it, what it does is it shuts the valve off several feet below. So in my case, I think it's down 4 feet. So at the 4-foot levels where that valve is, it shuts the valve off, but it's a two-way valve. It shuts off the water coming from the cistern, but it opens a valve to allow all the water in that pipe to your frost-free spigot. It drains completely out so it won't freeze. But if you use it over and over again and it's cold enough outside, it can also build up inside there. Even though it might be draining okay, the water will freeze on the inside of the pipe, and then the next water will freeze, and so on until it completely freezes up. So you have to be careful, which meant that when I went out to get water, in the dark now, remember, I would fill up a 2-gallon pot that I could put on the stove for hot water and a 7-gallon jug that I could use for cold water. Now let's think about this for a minute. You now have no running water inside your cabin and no drains inside your cabin. That means you're not taking a shower inside your cabin. It's not happening. You're not even taking a bath. So the first thing I had to do, since I did work in town, is I got a gym membership at one of the local gyms so that I could go work out and then have a shower, because I couldn't do it at my cabin. I could wash my hair and that kind of stuff, and if you were in the military, you've had an old canteen cup bath, well, you could do that, of course, and there were times when I did, but no running water, no running drains. That meant that when you did the dishes, you had to take that water and dump it out over the bank. It meant that if you wanted hot water, you had to have a pot on top of your wood stove that keeps your water hot. Now, it may not seem like that big of a deal to have a pot on top of the wood stove to keep it hot, or to go out and get water every night from a frost freeze so that you had some kind of water, or that, in order to wash your hair, you'd have to use that hot water and a scoop of some kind to wash your hair into a sink that you had a bin in that you had to throw outside. But let me tell you, when you have to live with those kinds of challenges, Well, a lot of people aren't ready for that. Now, the guys that worked for me thought I was pretty much crazy. And there were some amazing times out there. For example, one day I left the cabin and headed to work, and I heard what I thought must have been a horse, kind of a clippity-clop going down the road in front of me. And I came around a corner, and there was this monster big moose trotting down the road in front of me. I guess he was commuting to work too. Now, some of the other challenges you might face, or at least I did, was snowfall. Now, you might think, big deal, snowfall happens in the winter, right? Yeah, well, guess what? When you live in a cabin that's up 3,200 feet on a north slope, down 3 miles of goat trail road, Jeep trail almost, to the main road below, and there's no county out there plowing that road for you, and you end up with a foot of snowfall between the time you were just sitting in your cabin in the evening enjoying a good book and the morning when you got up and decided to check the weather. Well, it was a good thing that I could work from my cabin. And you might think, well, it's only a foot, but what if you already had snow on the ground? And you've got grades as much as 22% to go down. Well, guess what? When you've got a foot or a foot and a half of snow that's fairly fresh, that needs to get plowed, and you've got steep grades that you've got to go down, well, you might have to get out and plow it before you go to work. That morning, I took care of the things I had to take care of, let everybody know I wasn't going to make it to work very early, and then I had to go out and warm my tractor up, which of course is one of those challenges. You may even have to shovel off your tractor before you get it warmed up, and you have to let it warm up because diesels don't like to just fire up cold and away you go. So you got to fire your tractor up after you've shoveled it off, of course, and then let it warm up for half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on how cold it is. And then, if you've got an open tractor like I do, you better bundle up because it's going to get cold. And you've got to then plow out your driveway to the main road, which is really a driveway, and then all the way down to the pavement. And one time when I was doing that, I'd given up having chains on the back tires of my tractor because the chains I had just fell between the lugs. I really needed a better set of chains, and I had just spent a lot of money on those chains, and they were just not doing it for me. So I'd given up using them, and I just had chains on the front. I plowed all the way down. That's 3 miles of road that you're doing at about 3 miles an hour if you're lucky. And you've got to stop and turn your non-hydraulic plow blade one direction or the other, slide it in and out, all that kind of stuff. So I probably spent close to 2 hours plowing down to the main road below. Then, when I tried to drive back up to my cabin, I couldn't do it. And I had tried all kinds of things, but that first steep hill, which happened to be in such a place that the trees shaded it, and it got solid ice under the snow, that once I plowed off the snow, I just had ice. I might not have made it up there in the snow, but I certainly wasn't going to make it up there with the snow plowed off the ice. And I tried over and over again. Every time I thought I had it, I'd get almost all the way up the hill. And let me tell you something, there's nothing more, well, bothersome than sliding backwards in a 6,500-pound tractor down a hill where you may end up rolling it. Fortunately, I got pretty good at jamming the blade down and setting my bucket tilted this way so that I could jam it into the ice and have the blade and the bucket on my tractor slow me down as I slid backwards. Oh yeah, fun. Then I had to go down to the pavement with my chained up tractor, the fronts were chained up, and drive all the way down to another road that I knew could possibly get me home. Then from there, which was probably at least 1.5 miles or so from my driveway, I could take another road that got me up a different route back to my driveway. Fortunately for me, and trust me, it's a bit of a drop off there, so you don't want to slide off, but fortunately for me, I was able to make it up that one okay. That's just life, right? So now I've got frozen water pipes, frozen drains, I've got no running water at all, can't take a shower, I gotta plow the road, I gotta stock up the wood, I gotta keep the cabin warm. All of that is just part of the experience. Meanwhile, well, you gotta make sure you don't run out of water in your cistern. So you've got to constantly turn that solar panel a little bit if you're trying to make sure you got enough water, because guess what? You need water. Well, guess what? One Sunday, when I was trying to fill up that cistern, I was just having an easy morning. I would sit in front of the wood stove, read for 45 minutes. Then I would get up, put my boots on, walk out to the well, which is about 45 to 50 yards from the front of the cabin, and I would turn my solar panel again so it faced the sun. Well, one of those times when I walked out, I noticed a set of footprints next to my own. And I thought, I mean, it's about 1.5 feet of snow. I can't tell what they are. Kind of looks like it could be a dog or something, but I couldn't really see because, 1.5 feet of snow, I couldn't see them. But I walked back to the cabin, wasn't much thinking about it. I went and checked on the tractor. I might have been having it warmed up or something, I don't remember, but I checked on the tractor and all was well, and I went into the cabin and I read for 45 minutes. Then I got up, stoked the wood stove, whatever, got up, put my shoes on, threw my coat on, walked out to that same solar panel and turned it again to make sure it was tracking into the sun. Well, that second time I went out, I noticed another set of footprints out there. I already had the one that was on the left. Now I got another set on the right. Well, at first I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder if it's a dog following me around. But I went out to the solar panel, I adjusted it, checked everything, and I started walking back, and then I noticed that those footprints went right to my tractor. Wonder what those are. So I took a closer look, and there happened to be some prints in just the right spot that the snow was a bit shallower by the tractor, and I could see that there were no claw marks, and they had that kind of distinctive triangular 3 round pads on the back of a cat. So we're talking about a cougar. Now, not a really big one. We can get cougars that are over 200 pounds out here. I think this one was probably a little over 100 pounds. Probably a yearling cougar that had been kicked out by mama and it was trying to figure its way in the world, I'm sure. But let's be honest. Having a cat follow you around a little bit, it's a bit unnerving. But wait, there's more. Now, I go back in the cabin and I sit and I read for a while. And 45 minutes, I get up, I go turn my solar panel, and there are more cat prints around. Finally, near the end of the day, I get up, get dressed, go back out to turn the solar panel one last time, and on my way back, I noticed something that I had not seen before. And that was the cougar tracks walked up onto my deck, right to where my 4-foot window was that I was sitting across from inside my cabin. So I'm sitting there reading away in front of my wood stove while the cat had walked right up to that window and looked inside. I wish I'd have had a GoPro then, huh? Of course, I didn't see it because I was too busy reading and he was quiet. So after that, I finally called a buddy of mine that lived about a mile away and I said, hey, what are you guys up to? I got to turn my water off and blow my lines out tonight because I was going to be leaving the next day to head home. So they came out to hold flashlights for me because that's another challenge that you might be faced with. When you're trying to blow your water lines out and it's 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening or whatever, because at that time I'd got my running water working, well, it's dark. You can't see. You might have a headlamp on, but you can't hold a flashlight and at the same time try to run a valve for your water line and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work, right? You got to drop a T-bar 4 feet down to where the main valve is and shut that valve off. You can't even see unless somebody's holding a flashlight for you. Your headlamp just isn't going to cut it. Well, when they showed up, they were laughing the whole time. And they said, that cat came walking right from the main road, hit your driveway, and walked straight into your cabin. We followed it all the way up. And they never saw the cat, though I have seen cats out there before. They're elusive. You rarely ever see them. And the more we looked, the more we realized that cat had followed me all around. Everywhere I went, the cat went. And every time I went back in the cabin, it seemed like it came out and sniffed wherever I went. And it would come from different directions all the time. So the whole time, there were cat tracks going in every compass direction you can imagine. They would go out one direction and then come in another one. And then go out another direction and then come in another one. So that cat hung out all day long following me around the woods. So now you've got, it's dark, you can't see, you can't use your drains, your toilet I haven't talked about, and now you've gotten running water again, though I was still using my frost-free quite a bit, but as long as I had running water and the temperature wasn't too cold outside, I would use it. But we've got other issues. When I left for Christmas and came back, what I didn't realize is there was still some water left in the pipes of my Instant On hot water heater, and those pipes cracked. So even with running water, I couldn't have any hot water. I had to keep that shut off. Otherwise, I'd have just flooded my back room. So you've got a back room that's hard to get into also, I might add, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But you've got no running hot water. Maybe you've got running cold water, which I did most of the time. But here's another thing I learned the hard way. If you're using a composting toilet with a sewage pipe that goes under your cabin, there's no side skirting, so it's open to the elements, and you don't make sure that you truly flushed all the way down to your composting bin, which is in fact in a warm room, at least 50 degrees, then that stuff freezes. And it'll freeze over and over again until your toilet is frozen solid and you can't use it until you thaw it out. And in my case, that meant that I had to get a heat tape and wrap it around that pipe and run my generator long enough to thaw that out so that I could finally go back to using my bloody toilet. So now you're running your generator twice a day, every 2 hours. You show up in the dark, you leave in the dark. You've got to stoke that wood stove as your priority in the morning and when you get back and before you go to bed at night. You've got to make sure you've got all your wood stacked up inside your cabin and out on your porch. And don't forget that if you don't feel well, there's nobody there to get your wood stove going for you. There's nobody there to bring in more wood. So you need to prepare for that. You can't have a shower because your gray water drains don't work. So now you've got to carry the water out. And by the way, you got cougars following you around every time you go outside. Folks, I will tell you that first winter off-grid was an adventure, an absolute adventure, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. To kind of recap things and wind this up a little bit, I would say that one of the most important things for you to have if you're going to live off-grid, and it's your first winter living off-grid, number one is to establish a routine. And that routine needs to address any of the issues that you anticipate that you could face. Number two is to be flexible and be prepared. By being flexible, I mean understand that you may have to change the way you live. You may have to use less power. You may have to use more generator. You may need to get more batteries. You may not be able to have a shower. You may not have running water or running hot water. All of those things are going to come into play living out there in the woods in the winter, especially if you're in an area that, well, the winters are dark. And here's another thing that I hadn't mentioned before, but that is to realize that you may have no solar production for days on end. So you need a generator. You got to be prepared to deal with that as well. I will say this, I think it's a great experience for anybody to go through. I think I grew a little bit during that experience because you know what? There's nothing like being humbled by Mother Nature. And believe me, Mother Nature humbled me a little bit that winter. On the other hand, doing it was one of the greatest experiences because I can sit here and laugh about it today. And that's the final lesson that I think I'll present to you today. And that is learn to laugh at yourself. Don't take yourself so seriously. Yes, you're going to make mistakes. Yes, you're going to do things wrong. But as long as you are flexible, prepared, and can establish a solid routine, you'll be okay. But I will tell you this, don't hesitate to ask for help, because something else about living off-grid is that it takes sometimes extra help to get things done. If you're not able to ask somebody else to help you out, I suggest you need to rethink that, because sometimes we can't do it all alone. Sometimes we need a little bit of help. Well, folks, I hope this helps somebody out. It was a crazy experience for me, but I loved every minute of it. It was really quite the fantastic thing, and I'm not a loner. I don't like to live alone. It's just not my way. But it was a wonderful experience. I would do it again, though physically now I wouldn't want to because I'm a little too beat up today. But if I was a little younger, I certainly would. All right, folks. That's all I got for you today. I'm going to drop another video right here. And by the way, if this helped anybody out or if you enjoyed this, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Helps the channel out. Y'all have a great day. The old Jarhead out.